And some of our snares will now be slightly quieter, whereas some are going to be slightly louder. What's up guys, it's Anders. In today's video, we're going to have a look at the drums in Logic, and more importantly, how to make the MIDI drums in Logic feel real, and as well how we can then take the MIDI and some ways we can manipulate it into giving more of a live feel for a kit. And then you can apply what you learn to any of the third-party drum VSTs you're using inside Logic. When you've got your music all ready for release, you can hand it over to the channel sponsor. Let's dive into Logic. Do you want to get your music onto the likes of Spotify, Apple Music, even TikTok? Keep 100% of your earnings and get paid monthly if you choose? Get into those stores up to 20 times faster than some other distributors and do it all at a ridiculously low yearly price. Check out the channel sponsor, Distrokid. Okay, so we're just going to use this project today as a little bit of an example of some of the things we can do. At the minute, I've got a combination of Logic's drummer doing some hi-hat and ride stuff. With a shaker in there. Just got the kickers audio. Got a MIDI snare. A top loop. Nice little shuffle. And then I've got an older break just underneath it. With a tiny bit of a perk loop here. And all together they build up the drums for the track. Now when it comes to doing like some MIDI drums and getting like a lively MIDI feel in Logic, I'd suggest the best place to actually start is with a drummer. And what we'll do is we'll just make up a new section here. And what we'll do, go up to here in the top left-hand corner, we're going to hit plus, and then we're going to grab a drummer track. Now, the type of MIDI data that we're going to get is going to be like these yellow ones at the top here. And we need to roughly choose what we're after. I'm going to go rock, because rock tends to have what I could use in this track. It's best to have a play around with the different genres and see what you can get. So let's hit create on that, and that's going to make a new track for us. And as you can see, it's covered the whole portion of the track with different types of drum loops. Now, each one of these is its own kind of set loop, right? So we can press U. Just to loop over the intro. Select chorus. We just jump to the chorus. It's obviously a very different sound, right? We can go to verse. And it's got a slightly different performance. You can hear it's brought a hi-hat in there, for example. It wasn't there on the other one, yeah? We're using rides here. Now, firstly, they all sound pretty realistic anyway, right? Well, let's just have a quick look at how we can manipulate those before we take this even further. So they're all controlled with the smart controls down the bottom here. We're just going to wipe out the others and just work off one so we can focus on it here. So on this chorus tab, we've got a nice little sort of XY grid over here, right? If we bring it right in the left-hand corner, it's going to be quiet and simple. Top left-hand corner, it's still going to be a simple rhythm, but it's going to be a lot louder. Simple as that. Bring it over to the right, going to increase the complexity. It really is simple as that. So you can think low to high, going to be volume, and then left to right is going to be the varying complexity that it brings out. And all this is really doing, it's loading up a MIDI track, putting it into our drum kit here. Now what's clever is all the little performance nuances that change as well. We can change the drum kit round and it's going to change our type of pattern. So for example, let's take off the rides here and our pattern changes. We've still got the crash at the start, but there's no longer any rides. We can put the hi-hat in. We can use the slider here to change the type of pattern specific to that section of the kit as well. You can hear just during the end of each 4-bar segment here, we've got a type of roll or a fill. So we've got a fill just there, and then a larger one at the end of this segment. Those are determined by this little guy over here. The more we crank it up, the more fills we get. And notice how they're all at intelligent intervals. If we bring it right back, we'll just have a short fill at the end of the 8 bars. Right, that's all well and good, but how can we actually make this useful and bring it into, say, MIDI, for example? Let's give this a little bit of swing. I mean, so first off, these already sound pretty realistic. They give a realistic feel, and you can learn a lot from what we're about to do. Over on this little chorus bit we've just made, and we've configured it to how we like it, let's say, we can right click it just here, and we can do convert to MIDI region. This is now going to let us see how that performance was actually made in terms of MIDI. You know, if you can't see this at the bottom, we're going to have the chorus selected and just press E, and that's going to bring that up for us. And if we just give a little click on it and press Z, it will zoom right in. And let's let it take up even more of our screen here. The big thing that we can probably note here is there's lots of different velocity changes. Now, if for any reason you can't see all these green dots at the bottom, you need to click on 2 things. So this icon just here, and also tap A to show hide automation once we've got this piano roll selected. And there's a little drop down menu here, and we just want to make sure we go and grab note velocity. So the change in velocity is one of the things that gives the real feel of these being organic drums. It's not always hitting at the same velocity, right? Then having things like the little misstep here, which is actually a lower velocity, just gives a feel of a real drummer getting ready to reset into the next 4 bars. Just keeping their own count, right? Little touches like that just help us give that feeling of it being real. Now, it's important that our drum kit understands that we've got different levels that can be achieved. So if we have a look at, say, our snare center here, they're all pretty high hits and they're pretty consistent apart from the little roll off, and you do really notice it when it happens at that 4th bar. What we also need to realize is that when we hit them at different velocities, we get a different sound, a different sample. It's very different to the louder one. Now, a way that we could add even further feel of this being real, let's highlight all of our snares like so. As you can see, they're pretty rigid apart from where it drops down, and it's nice, it works. Maybe we want to have our drummer be slightly less consistent. So with all the snares highlighted, right, what we can do is go into function, we can go into MIDI transform, and we can do random velocity. Now at the moment, it's going to randomize the velocity anywhere between 40 and 127. That's going to be far too much for us. What we want to do is maybe gauge it all the way up. So we can do, say, 110 to 120, just to give it a bit of flex. If we hit operate only, we'll be able to see that effect. And we've now got kind of almost a wavy line happening. And some of our snares will now be slightly quieter, whereas some are going to be slightly louder. Now, that's one of the tricks that we can use, and I tend to apply it just to individual elements within the loop, right? If we were to do it to everything all at once, we'd just have this really inconsistent feel. We've controlled where that snare is going to be. It's always going to be loud, but it's got 10 different types of loudness it can be at, if you want to phrase it like that. And then we could do similar things with the kick drum. However, things like the kick drum need a bit more of control than the randomness, and we can see that when we highlight, say, this section here, we can see that it's actually very controlled. And the quieter hits coming into the louder hit. And these work as kind of ghost notes. Now we can do something like this with our snare as well. So we could take our snare center here and we could copy this over and we could do this kind of double kick beating kind of thing. Now the snare roll there sounds very unnatural. It's almost impossible to do, but the second hit would usually be a lot quieter and we'll get something like this. Now you don't really notice it, but you're just kind of getting that sound of the stick bouncing off as it impacts with the snare drum. The other one we can do is put ghost notes in before it happens. Put those in very quietly. Now, if you want to get the impression of a recorded drum kit, almost always when the kick drum hits, it makes the snare wires rattle just a little bit. So what we can do here is we can do something like put a really quiet snare under the loudest kick. You still get the snare hit, but you can always kind of hear that snare wire, if you will, rattling in the background. You know, we could take them and make them even quieter in these instances. Now, the other thing to look at is we've got really rigid timing in a lot of the instances as well. We put a bit of swing in and it totally affects the kicks that are off the beat. But look at even our hi-hat here, for example, it's dead on the beat. It's super, super rigid. So something else we'd do is maybe add a little bit of off timing. And again, we can do that randomized instead of shuffling each note around, which you could totally do. And you could shuffle to your heart's content to get that kind of right feeling of the notes being slightly off. We can again use a tool. So let's highlight our hi-hats, and this time we're going to go across a larger section so we can really hear what's going on. And this time we can do function, MIDI transform, and we've already got lots of random velocity going on with the hi-hats, but we want to do the timing to be a little bit randomized. So what we're going to do here is we're going to choose humanize. Now, humanize gives us a few different parameters, and we're going to want to make sure we turn the velocity down to 0. We don't want it to randomize our velocity, and we don't need it to randomize our length either, which is linked in here. So we're going to take that one down to 0 as well. What we do want, however, is a bit of a random position, and if we hit operate only here, we see some very, very slight movements happen, almost imperceptible. Now when we go and zoom in, we'll see that our hats in some places are just ever so slightly off. Okay, and it's been randomized, but they've all been ever so slightly pushed back until this one's still bang on. So now we've got some slight randomization timing issues going on in the hi-hat, which is a lot more natural and realistic sounding. Let's try putting that snare wire trick in for all of the major hits on the kick, and we can just line it up with the ones that are red here. And then just maybe every now and then we'll double up on that snare when we've got some space like this and there's not hits coming in straight away. That one there where we actually get it louder towards the end, that could be interesting. Let's try that out. There you go, guys. That's just a couple of tricks we can use in Logic to help the MIDI drums get a much better feel. Now we can take this a step further because this will now apply to any of the Logic drum kits. And as they're universally MIDI mapped, you could save the MIDI or export the MIDI and bring it over to one of your third parties. That's what we're going to have a look at doing now. So at the moment, this works with the drum kit that was set up here. However, we can actually load any of Logic's drum kits and it's still going to work for us. So we can actually now check our pattern out and cycle through different kits. And with the Logic drum kit designer, we can actually change out individual elements. So let's say we don't like the snare on this kit. You can actually grab it and we've got different snares to choose from. And we can actually change them as we like as well. We can do things like dampening and tuning. We we can mix that up a fair bit. That's something to dive deeper into in another video. Now, my other point was, because these are universally MIDI mapped, and because these sit with the universal MIDI mapping, we can actually just take the pattern we've now made and put it onto something like this, which is a vintage kit from Native Instruments, and we've already got a pattern layout. And it's ready to go. So even if we were to load up something like the Modern Drummer, because they're universally mapped, we'll instantly be able to check out different kits with our new pattern. There you go, guys. That's my quick tips for making MIDI drums feel more realistic in Logic Pro. Hope the video was helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.